install a set of Hooker 4901 titanium coated headers on my 1971 Formula 400 Firebird. As with all Pontiacs, the paint burns off the exhaust ports, but I wanted it to look nice putting on a new set of headers, so I wire brushed them and repainted the heads. While I was at it, I went ahead and sanded the valve covers and repainted those as well. Cleaned everything out, new set of gaskets, and it looks pretty sharp. The exhaust system on the car is the pipes stainless steel 2.5-inch system. It hasn't been on the car that long, so the bolts are pretty easy to get off. The head pipe's clamped to the X pipe, so once you loosen the clamps and I drop the head pipe from the exhaust manifold, all I have to do is twist the head pipe and pull it out. Depending on your situation, the exhaust manifold bolts can be difficult to get out. This engine was rebuilt in 2010 and it only has about 2,000 miles on it, so the bolts weren't too difficult to get out. With these manifolds, once the bolts are removed, you can pull the manifold out from the top. Probably should have loosened the clamps before taking the head pipe loose, and was trying to loosen the head pipe from the X pipe and the whole thing came down, but that's not a big deal. And the same as the right side, once the clamp's loose, just twist the head pipe and pull it out of the X pipe and set it to the side. We're going to end up using part of it to attach the headers to the X pipe. The exhaust manifold on the driver's side has to be dropped down through the bottom of the car. And once you get all your bolts loose, you can kind of just slide it down the back of the cross member, and if you do a good job, you won't even scratch the paint. The oil filter housing has to be removed to get the right side header in. After removing the housing, I took some masking tape and just taped up the oil ports so I don't get any debris in there. And you can see the dramatic difference between the tube headers and the cast iron exhaust manifold. Now that I have everything out of the way, now it's time to slip the headers in place. All I needed was a set of jack stands under the front control arms. That gave me enough clearance to get the headers in. After the header's set in place, I go up on top, slip the exhaust gasket in place and start the front bolt. And once the front bolt's started, I can come back, and from the bottom I can maneuver the gasket and then get the rear bolt started. The right side header is kind of tricky in that the header bolt behind the number 6 tube is really difficult to get in. So what you need to do is the flange is slotted, so you need to slide the header forward about an inch. Start the header bolt behind number 6 in the slot, and then slide the header tube back, and then the rest of the bolts go in fairly easy. The left side, you do the same process. Get the gasket in place, start the front header bolt, then come underneath and do the rear. The left side doesn't need any special procedure like the right side did with the number 6 bolt. All the bolts on the left side are relatively easy to get started. If you've ever installed a set of headers, you know it's not the easiest job to perform. But at the same time, it's not impossible. Just got to have a little bit of patience, don't get too excited, and just take it one step at a time. The oil pressure sender fitting in its factory position is not going to work. You have to rotate the fitting more vertical so the sender will clear the header tube. You'll need to remove the factory elbow retape it and reinstall the fitting. Otherwise, if you just try to back it up a little bit, it'll leak on you. I went to my hardware store and picked up a 1.5 inch long 1/8 inch pipe nipple and an 1/8 inch pipe coupling. I got mine in brass. You could use steel. Alright, the oil filter housing's back in place, and you can see there's plenty of clearance now between the sender and the header. Also, a nice surprise is that with the factory transmission cooler lines and a factory bent modulator line, the headers clear everything. I didn't have to bend a single line to get plenty of clearance. To connect the starter wires, I used a small floor jack, then lifted the starter and the starter solenoid up to a height where I could easily connect the wires without putting a lot of tension on the wires. wanted to route the battery cable to the front to avoid the header tubes. So what I had to do is I had to remove the cable, and I put the lug in a vise and then gently bent the lug 90 degrees, and I went slow to try to avoid cracking it. The battery cable position here at about 10 o'clock was too close to the block. I ended up loosening it up and moving it to about between 11 and 12 o'clock. Still plenty of header clearance, and then I had a nice gap between the cable and the block so it wouldn't short. I used a set of Summit stainless steel header reducers, and the reducers are 3" to 2.5". I didn't use collector gaskets when mocking it up. Of course, I used them on the final install. And I just tightened the bolts up finger tight. Tried to make sure that the reducer was square on the flange. I cut pieces from the head pipe to adapt the reducers to the exhaust system. And the piece you see I'm bending down right there, I ended up having to extend that as well to get the pipe to go deep enough into the X pipe to prevent any exhaust leaks. Adapting the reducer to the exhaust on the driver's side was a little more of a challenge. I ended up having to angle the adapter, maybe 10 degrees to get it to line up correctly. Here I'm welding the small adapter pipe to the reducer for the driver's side. You can see the angle. When I weld stainless, I just use regular old MIG wire. I've never had a problem with it cracking. And, that's what I use, and I've never had any trouble with it. I only weld a few times a year, so I'm certainly not an expert. These welds look good enough to me, and they're on the bottom of the car, so nobody's going to see them anyway. Now here we got the system all hooked up and tightened down, and it doesn't look too bad. I didn't like the formula's throttle cable bracket and coil bracket setup. The factory style brackets made me route the wires back behind the coil, and I didn't like that look. I wanted the left side wires to come close to matching what the right side wires look like. So I went ahead and modified the throttle cable bracket, and I mounted the coil on the firewall, and I just like that look a lot better. Well, job's done. Took me a little longer than it did when I was 25, but managed to get her done.